We want to bring you back to Washington now, where, as we mentioned, President Trump accepted his party's nomination yesterday during the final night of the Republican National Convention. The president used his speech to paint himself as the law and order candidate. So let us head over to Major Garrett to talk a little bit more about what we saw last night. Major, our CBS News Battleground Tracker has found that Republicans and Democrats, they definitely have a different view on the main purpose of the protests that have swept across the country this summer. Now, we should be clear that the poll was actually conducted before the police shooting of Jacob Blake, so maybe it would be a little different. I don't know. What is the president hoping to accomplish, though, with his messages about the protests and law and order? You know, last night there was sort of like one line about how, they support people's right to protest or express themselves, and then he very quickly pivoted into, being critical of the activities.
Right. So there's an important fusion going on here with the president's rhetoric, and it was backed up by many other Republican speakers during this non-convention convention, meaning there was no convening except for one quick day in Charlotte, this flat screen virtual convention. All the speeches, though, that touched upon this issue, broadly defined as law and order, had a fusion type message, and the fusion was this. If you are watching what's going on in various cities and you see disturbances, the disturbances are lawless and criminal and wrong, and they should scare you. The fusion also is, even if they're peaceful, those protests are about an agenda that is also dangerous to America. The president said it, the vice president said it, and many other Republicans said this agenda for former Vice President Joe Biden, running mate Kamala Harris, will destroy America. Not my words, their words. Very apocalyptic language. You will not be safe in Joe Biden's America. You will not recognize America if Joe Biden is elected. So it's not just about disturbances in the streets. What the Republicans want people to conclude is that any protest on behalf of racial justice right now has something that is subversive about it and threatening to America as Trump supporters understand it to be. It is as divisive a line and as a bright a line as can be drawn in this moment in America of reflection and reckoning about what our racial history has been, what our racial past and sins have been, and what we might do to remedy them in the future. The Republicans and President Trump said, really, the remedy is not the issue. I'm the protector, and if you feel unsafe, that's all that matters.
Major, there's so much to break down from the president's speech yesterday. We could spend an hour on this broadcast fact-checking him, but I want to specifically talk about something that I don't know has gotten some attention, but I just think it's so monumentally unprecedented. The President of the United States delivering his address, a political address, but from what looked to me like a campaign rally from the White House, from a taxpayer-funded White House that does not belong to President Trump and his family. While there are, 1,000 Americans dying every single day from this pandemic, not only does the message that there was no social distancing or mask in place for most people, but this message that he delivered, this campaign rally from the White House. Can you just talk about how just unprecedented that is? There is no precedence for this, is there?
There is no precedent for it whatsoever. And I guarantee you the Trump campaign loves to hear me say that and loves to hear you say it, because that is part and parcel of, it's a component part of the president's reelection message, which is 4 years ago, you put somebody in this office who had no military experience and no political experience, the first time that it ever happened in our nation's history. And he promised you that he would overturn and upset and topple all sorts of norms in America. And he's doing it again now. See, it's proof. It's almost, for the Trump campaign and those who support it, affirmation that this is something that ought to happen. It's a natural outgrowth of this presidency. The question for the country is, are you comfortable with a president, any president, using the trappings of office, which are, in our nation's history, nonpartisan and as close to politically secular as possible, meaning we all have some sense of acknowledgement, pride, and civic attachment to the White House. Is it okay now to use those grounds and all the awesome power of the presidency for nakedly political purposes? It's not just the speech last night, the naturalization ceremony done at the White House, done in the middle of a Republican nominating convention, taking again a secular, civic, prideful service, a naturalization ceremony, something that all Americans of all parties or no parties take justifiable pride in, and using it as a political weapon on behalf of the incumbent president. These things are all brand new. And last week, the Biden campaign said norms are being broken and we will not recognize those norms if President Trump is reelected. This week, in their own way, the Trump campaign said, you know what, we agree. America, decide.
Yeah, and just to point out with the naturalization ceremony, at least the Washington Post is reporting that at least one of those women didn't even realize that it was going to end up in the middle of the Republican convention. She wasn't that upset about it, but, she wasn't told ahead of time that that was what was going to happen. So, Major, listen, of course, everyone knows you host a fantastic podcast called The Takeout. This week, you spoke to Julian Castro, and you spoke to him about the president's criticisms when it comes to mail-in voting. I want to play some of that.
There's a cleverness behind what he's doing, because what he's doing is that he's setting up doubt, creating doubt around an election that he's probably going to lose. And that doubt may give him, in his mind, some latitude to try and challenge it in court, and that's the first step to try and stay in power. On the other hand, though, these polls show, as you suggest, that the people that are really hearing him and all of a sudden say they're not going to do their usual voting, which is usually, especially older Americans, mail-in balloting, are his people. So let's just take a state with all of the, with one of the most important states, Florida, 29 electoral votes, a huge senior community. Many of those probably most of those seniors are Republican. They vote Republican. Probably they're going to vote as a majority for Donald Trump. Now, they are expressing concerns about whether they should mail in ballot. Okay, well, if you have a senior population, you're probably going to have some issues with people being able to get to early voting sites in the same way. That's a lot less convenient for somebody that's 75, 80, 85 than just filling out your mail-in ballot and sending that off. Could that cause people to end up not voting?
Right.
Yeah, you could see a fall off.
This is something that I've wondered about for a while, Major. We know that the president, at least during the last election, enjoyed a lot of support from seniors. And we're just looking at one sort of group here, seniors. We know that they are probably going to feel less safe going out to vote because we're in the middle of a pandemic and they are a vulnerable population. There's probably going to be fewer places to vote for this very same reason. It's a little tough to get people to work at some of these places now. And I also thought, you could sort of criticize mail-in balloting. It's not a perfect system.
Nope.
The problem isn't fraud. There are other problems with signatures, people not knowing how to, fill it out properly and all that sort of stuff. So I thought to myself, why take the path of, this is a fraudulent, or the possibility for fraud is great, when you could actually sort of find a way to fairly be critical of the process? And why attack a process that is, there's a good possibility that it may backfire on Republicans?
Right. So this grievance, stated by the president, often erroneously, for weeks, was nowhere to be found in last night's speech. I find that to be highly significant, because the president's advisors know two things. One, everything that Julian Castro said is true. It alarms your base and may make them less likely to vote. That is a problem. Don't aggravate that problem. You've already done enough. And secondarily, this is about telling the country all the things that the president has done that works. Well, if you tell people that voting by mail is fraudulent, you're telling them about something that doesn't work. And all this rhetoric last night about American exceptionalism and how we can accomplish anything, we can't vote, we can't figure that out. A great nation like this can't figure that out. It would be a conspicuous admission, not only of administrative weakness, but political vision. And they didn't have it in the speech at all. Now, I'm not suggesting the president won't go back to this. He very well might. But the fact that it was completely absent from the speech last night, the biggest stage to talk to Trump voters and the rest of the country that he will have until the debates come in late September and October, and even not as good as that because there's an answer back in a debate. This is a full hour. The president could say whatever he wanted to. Not a word about this. That to me is significant.
Major, before we let you go, I was signaling to our producers if we had time for another question. They didn't respond, so I'm just going to go ahead and ask you. Let me, we take the time when we can get it. That's what we do as anchors.
Yes.
Is it significant at all? I just want your take on this. Is it significant at all that in President Trump's acceptance speech yesterday, he mentioned Joe Biden's name at least 35 times to my count? It was interesting to me that Joe Biden in his acceptance speech did not mention President Trump by name. Is there anything to read into that?
There is. So the Biden campaign constructed that speech and constructed that message to the country as, I already know that you're opposed to Donald Trump or at least thinking about an alternative to Donald Trump. So let's talk about me. Let's talk about my vision. Let's talk about my sense of humanity, my biography, and the things I would bring to the country. Let's keep Trump out of it. And the Biden campaign made a strategic decision that that was the best way to rise into this moment and sound like a potential president for all the country, to not get harshly and critically partisan of the president, understanding that that had been a better part of the Democratic convention preceding his nomination acceptance speech. So he tried to rise to a higher level in that moment. The president, as the incumbent, said, you know what, I'm in a knockdown, drag-out fight with Joe Biden. He's ahead in the polls nationally, and he's ahead in the polls in some key battleground states, and I've got to get back in this game, so I've got to tear him down. I've got to tear him down personally and repetitively. Again, highly unusual for an incumbent president to do that, and to do it, again, from this place, the White House, which is a place for presidential action and presidential communication, not political, partisan conversation. But the president said, it's my place. I can't have a convention in an arena. I can't have it in Jacksonville, Florida. I mean, let's remind ourselves. Why is it at the White House? Because the pandemic is so out of control, not one, but two potential venues could not host it. Even in Jacksonville, where they were receptive to the idea of it. It just wasn't safe. And because it wasn't safe, the president had to find himself another location. He chose to be, depending on your orientation to the president, this grand political figure speaking from this glorious position, or a captive because of the COVID-19 virus in public housing.
All right, Major Garrett breaking it down for us on this Friday. Major, as always,
Don't you love the way Major
Don't
you love the way Major phrases things? That last line was like award-winning, Major. That one last line was like worth the whole interview.
Too kind.
Thank you, Major Garrett. We
Thanks.
appreciate it as always. And you can hear more of Major's conversation with Julian Castro right here on CBSN. You will get to hear more of those bon mots that Major uses when he is interviewing guests. That's at 9 tonight.